Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're right at noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome to the Soil Health Partnership Forum. This is our October session of it. My name is Jennifer Simmelink. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Soil Health Alliance, who hosts the forum. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. A recording of today's forum and all previous forums are housed on the Kansas Soil Health Alliance's website, as well as on our YouTube page. And then links of the recordings are also going to be posted on our social media pages, and then will be sent through our newsletter. To start off today's forum, as I've done before, we're going to put up a quick 2-question survey for everyone to fill out. Just helps us get a little bit of an idea of who's joining us today. I should have that launched. If you want to answer those 2 questions quickly, then we'll get ready to go. All right, thanks everyone for filling that out. So as we can see, we are predominantly farmer and rancher audience today, so that's wonderful. I hope all of you have been having a safe harvest and bountiful so far, and you got a little break from some moisture. I hope that didn't stall things too much and is appreciated. Some educator and researchers on. The next biggest chunk after farmer and ranchers, we have some of our fellow agency employees on. A couple of ag professionals, food company professional, and then some others. So a good blend of folks on today. And 18 of the 21 who replied are Kansans. So always happy to see lots of our Kansans on, and those from out of state, trying to make this accessible to all. So we appreciate that. As a reminder, everyone will remain muted during the presentation. If you have a question, Joanne and I will keep an eye on screens. You can go ahead and raise your hand and we're able to call on you, or the Q&A is open throughout the entire chat. At the end, we will be able to open it up for any question and answer and for everyone to be able to unmute themselves. I also want to point out, if you look in the Q&A, I dropped a link. Actually, Amanda Johnson is who you'll see it from. That's a link for the 2026 Soil Health Partnership Forum registration. So you can copy that put it in, or copy that link, paste it in your browser, and you can get signed up for all of next year's forums. We'll also be sending that out in our newsletter and on social, but this would get you a head start to have that signed up. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Joanna Johnson, our Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Kansas Soil Health Alliance, to introduce today's presenter.
Okay, so today we have Brian Rast, PE, PMP, CFM. He's a Water Resources Project Manager in Stantec's Overland Park, Kansas office, beginning in 2025. His experience as a floodplain leader, connector, and mentor to guide interagency teams has helped communities in flood risk management, analysis, and modeling since 1993. He transitioned from a 21-year career at U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Kansas City District. Brian is a registered professional engineer, graduating in 1994 from Kansas State University with a BS in civil engineering and a minor in natural resources and environmental science. He received an engineering management master's degree from the University of Kansas. He began work in civil site development, doing grading plans and engineering for stormwater systems and detention basins. Also, while consulting, he specialized in HEC RAS and HEC HMS modeling between 1998 and 2004. and he worked with older versions as far back as 1993. His work at the USACE diversified into planning, including the year-long Planning Associates Program training at the USACE Institute for Water Resources. This led to feasibility studies, decision documents, and various water resources projects for flood risk management. In 2011, USACE established the Silver Jackets program, partnering with state and federal agencies to improve flood resilience, and Brian served as the lead Silver Jackets coordinator for 2 teams in Kansas and Missouri. The Kansas team won Team of the Year in 2011. He developed a variety of flood awareness and flood mitigation tools that led to selection as the 2019 Silver Jackets Coordinator of the Year. Between 2013 and 2023, he did several assignments. He was a member of the National Non-Structural Committee for 5 years. In 2017, he worked 2 years for the Institute for Water Resources with the Levee Safety Program on the Public Awareness and Communication team. In 2021, he worked for a year serving the DoD Climate Action Team for the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Environment and Energy Resilience Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense Sustainment. Finally, in 2024, Brian was selected by USACE as the first endowed chair for the National Flood Risk Management Program, leading a special white paper capturing the best practices of the state teams. He has developed many techniques for raising awareness of flooding, leading to mitigation, including many presentations, several websites, multiple articles in the USACE Buzz newsletter, and other creative tools ideal for public engagement. Brian led the Kansas Healthy Watersheds Silver Jacket Project. He followed it with a Soils versus Structures project to develop a watershed level cost effectiveness approach, and he presented on the 2024 Kansas Governors Conference on these topics. With that, we'll let you take it away.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for that introduction. And I will say that, I've had the pleasure of working with Candy Thomas, who was previously with the NRCS and is now still involved in state work here in Kansas, and also with Scott Satterthwaite. And I can't see the participant list, so I don't know if they're on the call or not. But with me today, I believe I also have Erica Schmitz. She's with Stantec, and she's responsible for a lot of the successful modeling tools that we've had here today too. And so I want to give her due credit. And if you all have challenging questions, she's going to be the one that can help me with those. But there's been a lot going on in the past few years. We've been talking about different resilience measures, and one that is standing out in my mind a lot with the type of work that Stantec's been doing here in Kansas and nationally, and as well as internationally, is these nature-based solutions like soil health and land-based planning techniques. So we're going to be talking about these things today, and let's see make sure I got my slides in order here. Looks like I'm going to have to use, there we go. Okay. So, just as a overview of what I'm going to get into today, and I understand the background is, farmers and soil scientists. So, I'm going to try and blend that together, and it's going to be mostly in the realm of flood mitigation work that we've been practicing. One of the major projects we did recently for the state of Kansas Division of Water Resources is called the 10 Kansas Nature-Based Solutions cards and report. And it's a nice tool that the state's got available now. And then we're going to get into detail on the Washington Creek modeling work for those types of nature-based solutions or best management practices. And then I'll touch a little bit about the Silver Jackets past experience I had too, briefly, because that also involved some modeling. And then we can talk about next steps too. And at that point, we're kind of getting into a point where we can maybe get some feedback and or maybe even some dialogue if we have time. So this overlap of different disciplines and kind of requires us to have a lot of interdisciplinary and cross community of practice thinking that I think is kind of hard to come by these days unless we have somebody that can be a convener for those kinds of thoughts. When we talk about watershed management and flood mitigation too, there's a pretty unique overlap between these kinds of things. And it requires some knowledge of different kinds of measures. And as you know, I'm a civil engineer, having come from K-State, but I spent 21 years in the planning branch at the Corps and really learned to speak a different dialect while I was there. And there's a full menu of measures out there, which I'm showing here. And this isn't to be inclusive, but of everything, but you might notice the ones at the bottom right. I don't know if my pointer works for you guys there, but dams, flood walls, diversions, channelizations, levees. Those are the traditional things that, when we think of flood mitigation, that might be the solutions. But what I've tried to do is talk a lot over my past 10 years of experience with these non-structural solutions and other tools that are in our toolbox. And that includes the possibility of using land use policies or incentives, and also infiltrating rain where it falls, which is, according to Dennis Day, he's K-State's retired professor from landscape architecture, that is the most cost-effective thing that we can do. And of course, the beneficial uses that we sometimes forget about, but are important measures to consider. And it's a challenge really to look through different lenses, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a project manager, a planner, or an engineer. And I've had the ability to see at least three of those. Although I have been out in the field, I've been to Axville, Kansas, and I visited the Busing farms during one of the watershed groups, and I actually have some photos from that. And so that's critical to getting us from the observed problem to a potential solution. Over and over, I've noticed that one of the key things in getting our partnerships to work on any of these measures is a common vernacular. So the kind of definitions and terminology that we like to use, it can be all over the board sometimes. But in this particular one, I've kind of thrown together this slide. I used this at the Kansas Governor Conference too, just as a little eye opener to these kinds of nature-based solutions and other terms, because we have to use those terms to get to a discussion on the tools with these stakeholders. And, we're looking at flood hazards, flood mapping a lot, but that's not the only kind of benefits we see. We're not just seeing flood damages reduced or loss of life prevented, but we're also seeing the kinds of water quality tools that are in the same arena and should be discussed together, because they have co-benefits. And so that's how I met Scott Satterthwaite at KDHE. And his discussion and his observations were that there needs to be some integrated work with water quality and water quantity measures when we're trying to get to those kinds of targets and goals. And there's also other things that maybe not always on the mind of some of the public and others, but the systems approach, how we use watersheds and other tools, including partnerships. And some of the co-benefits we can talk about in terms of these soil ones, nature-based solutions that deal with soils are going to be not just adapting for climate impacts, but they're going to also be mitigating them. And I read a great book by Dr. Joe Handelsman, A World Without Soil, that really changed my look on agriculture. And I wish I had read it as far back as my undergraduate work at K-State, because I would have had a better idea of what some of my roommates were talking about as they were involved in agricultural fields of study. And so that is a great co-benefit is the climate mitigation piece that can be done by absorbing carbon. Well, when we talk about nature-based features, there's a lot of resources out there. There was actually the Corps of Engineers, who I worked for 21 years. Engineering Research and Development Center worked internationally to develop these guidelines and on nature-based solutions. And so a quick summary of the 5 areas they have in their resource, which I linked, are shown here. And we're going to really get into that soil and land management one. When we look at a systems approach, we would be, in this case, we should be considering a watershed. And so I'm going to assume that you guys have a little experience with watersheds. And when we're talking about that, let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. A watershed is, just to be clear on the definitions, is the area that drains to a single point. And so you can kind of see that gray area that drains to the riparian wetlands that are shown on this EPA figure. It's a nice visual of what a watershed is. Maybe you've seen Lane's relationship too, but this is one of my favorites because we're talking about the overlap of water quality and water quantity earlier. We're also talking about the trade-offs and changes in flow and water and rain. When a watershed responds to that, we can have aggradation occur in the flat areas that are draining out of that watershed, or we can have degradation happening when we change some of these other variables, like a little increased runoff from parking lots or from some tile drained agricultural water fields, uh, agricultural fields. Those can cause erosion and degradation. But we don't always know if the juice is worth the squeeze, and that's why we're talking about she mentioned the HEC centers, that's the Hydrologic Engineering Center earlier, and those tools that they have, if you're not aware of it, include HECRAS and HEC-HMS, and there's even a whole suite of economic ones too. But the bottom line is, those tools can be used if we have questions on how this stuff can apply to our work and our fields. And they can answer questions for the watershed districts. And in Kansas, of course, we got the RACs, those regional advisory committees. And there's also these hazard mitigation plans. And I'm happy to note that the Kansas hazard mitigation team is aware of how these things overlap, and they're considering different approaches. And that means there'll be partnerships down the road, I think. But let's get into the nitty-gritty here, the nature-based solutions. Stantec does a lot of work in this area. We have over 6,000 professionals that are working in this area, and a lot of experience to talk about. And so one of the projects you might be interested in down in Texas, Katy Prairie, the comprehensive site that included a watershed approach as well, but also had 17 miles of stream restoration. So these projects are available on our webpage if you guys wanted to dig into it. Right before I left the Corps of Engineers, unfortunately, last year, this still actually is this year, it would have been in May of this year, I had about 8 different proposals that we had put in that I had led, and one of them included this network for engineering with nature. And so I'm happy to note that Stantec is also involved in that partnership too. But it was interesting to see how those university professionals, including those at Oklahoma University and others across the nation, are potential partners in this kind of nature-based solutions work. And we have had different funding vehicles at Stantec, and one in our Overland Park office has gone through the FEMA mitigation technical assistance work. And one of the projects, and they're kind of similar to the Silver Jackets work that I was doing when I was at the Corps, because they can do flash flood analysis, they can do work with the nature-based solutions and watershed level systems. And that's exactly what they did with one of their task orders, if you want to call it that, just in 2019. And we're going to go into detail on that. And we have the need in Kansas to know exactly where these nature-based solutions are appropriate, but the communities and the and others, practitioners and agricultural producers don't know where they're most appropriate without a little guidance. So those international standards that I mentioned earlier that ERDIC produced, which is a very nice magazine of very large reference. It's a good tool, but it doesn't zero into them as well as what we did with this assignment. We produced a set of cards that are really easy to read, and these are posted on the Division of Water Resources webpage right now, and you can use that QR code to take you directly to it. And that's a nice tool for us to be talking about. And I could spend a lot of time on these, but I'm going to try and skim through them. But the 10, include stream restoration, floodplain reconnection, wetland playa, lake restoration, waterfront stormwater parks, detention and retention basins. This is a field where I have a little bit of experience in myself. Green streets, bioretention and bioswales, land conservation, soil health BMPs, and urban trees and forests. And all of these are great tools to be able to consider. And that I do recommend going to their webpage, take a look at that. I'll have that QR code at the end again. And you guys can have my slides as well, Joanna, if that helps. So let's talk a little bit about how we assess these tools and determine if the juice is worth the squeeze, as I was showing earlier. This is just south of Lawrence. This is the Lone Star Lake watershed. It's just south of Clinton Lake. And this is the work that Erica did. And, we have to, we were, when we did that project, we're very mindful of the different tools that the state had and the partnerships and approaches that the state was using, but also the local tools as well. In fact, Erica pulled some of the city of Lawrence's stormwater scenarios into the analysis here, and that was a helpful resource as well. And there was a rain event in 2019, of course, a very wet year that affected this watershed. So the modeling tool had that point of reference as well. And we usually will calibrate and do verification of those models. Here's a little vignette photo of some of the resulting flooding. This is taken by Douglas County. And you can see the sedimentation going on there as well on the depth of the mail up on the mailbox there. When we do these models, we'll start with the hyetograph and rainfall, but we also leveraged in this project the climate change tool that PEC and Lawrence, Douglas County, and the state have been working on. And of course, there's the 100-year event. And we always look at, we usually leverage LiDAR from the state. And so that becomes the source of our geometry data in our models. And then the land use data is important as well, and the soil conditions. But in this case, the soil is the D and C type. Those aren't really conducive to the kind of infiltration we'd like to see. So those have an impact on our results. And we want to take these different measures and we want to get to a point where users like you might be able to be advocates. And you can't really do that unless there's been some evaluation done and we know they're either not recommended, further studies needed, they're recommended, or they're very effective. And so, going through this process is critically important to talking to our elected officials and others to get to these solutions that might help. Again, here's the top 10 the menu for Kansas that we did our work on, and we wanted to go through that when we did this Washington Creek. So we actually applied that for the Washington Creek study and modeling work. And you can see the check down here on this slide of which ones were considered and eliminated. And this card we showed earlier, but we selected land conservation due to knowledge of the stakeholders in the Douglas County vicinity and those in the watershed and the kinds of needs they were looking at. Soil health as well. There were certain areas that they had indicated, the stakeholders had indicated that they wanted to protect. And so that became another factor. And in doing this, a very innovative approach where broke the watershed into 3 different future scenarios, and you can see the land use areas, and those affected how the alternatives were formulated. So the plan formulation work here considered some assumptions on the build out of that watershed as development pressure was coming for the I was going to say KU, but the Lawrence area, as that has students and many others that are continuing to come to the area, and the city's growing. Not only that, but we had the resource from the draft Lawrence, Kansas land development code and the setbacks that they had inside of there. And that those kinds of approaches were influencing how we decided to take the direction we decided to take the model in. And so preserving that riparian corridor was done, and you can actually see the classification for the land in those stream corridors. But also there are these pockets of soil that are high quality agricultural soils that they did want to be mindful of, and so that played into some of the alternatives that were formulated. So really, this is a sensitivity analysis, and wanted to see if we did some of these things, what kind of results we would have. And you can see that the future development alternatives with the nature-based solutions, they did reflect reduced flows, but we actually had difficulty with the larger events, and showed a little bit more lift for the 10-year event. And then looking at the 100-year and the future development alternatives with nature-based solutions reflect some reduced flows. And another way of looking at it that they came up with was to look at, and this is the kind of thing that the 2D modeling with HEC-RAS can do nowadays. So we had a lot of change in the power of these algorithms that are made free by the Hydrologic Engineering Center, but still take study efforts to apply. And in this case, we're looking at the amount of area that can be affected, but still we noticed that the riparian corridor measure actually achieved the lowest amount of area flooded, and not so much effect from the soil health measures or the infiltration measures. And a little more data there on comparison, and there just wasn't that much difference in the sensitivity analysis. And if you have some questions, we can talk with Erica here in a second. But we also did this kind of a project for Soldier Creek that is part of, comes into the Kansas River. It's a left bank tributary over in Topeka. And that was a project with, we actually used the HEC-HMS modeling system to do that sensitivity analysis. And you can see a photo here of the Axtell, Kansas farm, where the watershed groups have been proponents of these kinds of regenerative agriculture that can affect the soil health and as a nature-based feature. And I think in their case, it was mainly cover crops, but regenerative agriculture can include, as some of you all probably know, no-till cover crops, um, interspecies like perennials and trees, but then also mob grazing. Those can really change the infiltration abilities of the soil if you do them on a sustained basis, like 2 to 3 or more years. And there's a little um, image of the map for Soldier Creek, shows the kind of soil and land use. Actually, it's just the land use here. And in that HEC HMS model, we considered the crop land and the grazing land, and if they had different levels of adoption. And in this case, when we came up with the results for that model, there was we showed that with 100% adoption in those areas that could use the nature-based solutions of soil health, the effect could be an 8 to 9% reduction in flows. And then this just helps you show then that this is one tool in the toolbox. It doesn't mean it's the only solution, but it is a solution we should be talking about more. And I'm happy to say that I was talking with Scott about a year ago, and I know K-State is already looking at assessing these and doing these kinds of approaches and doing and doing some research and getting them documented. So, the message is we need to look at all the tools in the toolbox, and it's not going to get any easier. With the rainfall intensities getting worse, that just means there's going to be more degradation and there can be more flooding. And so I'm an advocate of looking at different alternatives and looking at them in terms of a watershed approach. You could do one of the things we do actually that the Corps does, and that actually Stantec can do as well, because we have IDIQs for the Corps. When we do the general investigations and we're looking at ecosystem restoration, there is the requirement of looking at cost effectiveness and incremental cost analysis. And you could do that for a watershed. And so I proposed that in the second phase of the Silver Jackets work that we were doing. And what we didn't get to was the actual work because the government shut down. So unfortunately, but what we need to look at is these types of points on a graph. And it's almost like I like to use the Clint Eastwood fistful of dollars as or the spaghetti Western analogy. If you have a few dollars, if you have a fistful of dollars, you really need to know when you have these points and these different alternatives, which one of them is going to offer the most bang for the buck. And there is a cost-effective frontier. And so, you only have a fistful of dollars. That's a Clint Eastwood movie. And if you have a few dollars more, you would want to know what that fourth alternative is. And this is just sort of a hypothetical graphic here, but we were starting to apply this for some of the projects in Rock Creek and Cross Creek in these watersheds that have watershed districts, joint watershed districts in Kansas, and they have some dams, but they also have the opportunity with their watershed management plans to look at these distributed land use practices or soil health measures. And those might be these seventh and sixth alternatives, maybe the third one. But we need to keep encouraging this kind of work, because this is the cost effectiveness analysis that's important to the decision making that's going to happen. And it helps to have a common variable too. So, you can pick any one of these to unite everybody on one of these watershed plans, and but that does take some work. And so, who's going to do the study work? Stantec's we're willing to raise our hands and be there for anybody that needs to do this work. And we've seen it in Iowa. Iowa has proven with their POWER acronym, which I'm showing there, that's the potential for watershed approach to reduce flood disasters. That's innovative thinking, and it's done on a systems basis. And I know it can be done because Iowa has demonstrated it. One of the partners for this kind of work can be that Network for Engineering with Nature. One of the things we got to do is change our terminology and our vernacular. Maybe we talk about shedding water, watersheds, but maybe catchments is the kind of term we need to be using. Working with our university partners, the state agencies, and also the landowners and the agricultural producers. I think we can do these kinds of things. So we know that we can get a lift with the modeling we've shown, and just how we do that is going to be important. So, a lot of good takeaways, for you all. The effects need to be understood, and there's different tools on how we can approach that. Sometimes it's a Silver Jackets project, sometimes it's FEMA mitigation technical assistance. Hopefully, we can keep finding these kinds of funding sources and pursuing these kinds of sensitivity analysis, because I think that's what it's going to take to really get to resilience for our state. So here are some web pages. You all can find the 10 cards I was talking about for Kansas. Those are at the web page there. You can also find out more using that top QR code about how Stantec is doing the work, and look forward to talking more with you all here. That's all I got, Joanna.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Brian, for the presentation and all those pieces. I'm looking right now. Looks like if you're able to open your Q&A, there weren't really some questions, but a couple comments on there that I'll give you a moment to read. And for those in the audience, I'm going to go ahead and I'm switching it so everyone is allowed to unmute yourself. If you have a question, you don't need to raise your hand. You can unmute and ask any questions of Brian. I'm going through right now and getting everybody that authority to do that on your own. I'll also put a plug in while I'm doing this. You mentioned the work on Soldier Creek that you were up at Bill Bissing's farm. Bill is one of the board members of the Kansas Soil Health Alliance, but he is also hosting a field day on Monday, November 3rd at his farm. So if anyone is interested in that, he farms near Axtell. If you go to kssoilhealth.org, we have a banner at the top of our homepage that'll give you information on more information on that field day and a registration link, so you can see for yourself what Bill's been doing on his farm that is helping lots of different ways. Okay, I think I have it set. If anyone has a question, you are welcome to unmute yourself. The Q&A is also still open, so please feel free to drop anything in there.
Well, this is Scott with KDHE. I worked with Brian for a long time. Brian, could you explain a little more about how we look at these soils? Because we looked at the soil survey, and the soil survey does not represent the amount of infiltration rate, aggregate stability, all those kind of things that the hydrologic model needs. And then maybe talk a little bit about how you got your 8.5%, because I think the people on the agricultural people on the webinar really need to understand that a lot of those designs for dams and all these structures really based on the kind of information that we as a soil health advocate can get people to better understand that if they improve their soil health on a watershed scale, there's much more likelihood to have reduced flow and reduced flooding.
And increased agriculture productivity, I would say.
Correct.
But yeah, in the HMS model, the hydrologic modeling system, that was done for Soldier Creek, and that approach used the saturated hydraulic conductivity and the porosity variables to and also the green amped approach in the model to tie to the types of soil. And so we had an expert named Greg Karlovitz, I know you recall. He was working with us on, and he's out of the Corps of Engineers Hydrologic Engineering Center, and his expertise was in the hydrologic modeling. And so those results, although hypothetical, seem to be well, they seem to be the thing we need to find confirmation with. And so this is where, the folks on this call might be able to help, because we want to get real field measurements and studies done. And of course, you and I we also went to Concordia, and NRCS had the test field there, which actually appears on the cover of that Buzz article, the newsletter article. So there needs, and I don't know what you might be able to say about the University of Kansas State doing the test field, which is near the stadium, I guess, right, in Manhattan.
Yeah, they actually have dedicated 100 acres to doing research on soil health, carbon sequestration. They started a new soil health lab. It's not open to the public, but it is collecting data, and we're in the process of kind of ensuring that we can sort of have the same message. We're looking at the same measurements, the same metrics. They're doing biological sampling, as well as all the physical and chemical that we do through our soil health analysis when we pay for that to be done. But I'd go back and say what we ended up doing was using a producer that gave us the infiltration rate in organic matter. Well, a lot of people don't know their infiltration rate. So I will tell you that I'm working with the state soil scientists in RCS, and we actually had pilot project until everything shut down. But we were going to go out and look at infiltration rate and aggregate stability and some other and organic matter and some of those kind of things, because the more of that kind of data we can get, the more likely we'll be able to populate these models and make them more confirmation on their validity. I will say also, you can go to the Kansas Healthy Watersheds. You can just put that in your Google, and there is a whole web page dedicated to what we did in Upper Soldier Creek. It's got the tech report if you're an analytical person. It's got videos if you're more of a visual person. We've got a fact sheet. There's all sorts of information in there. And you can also go to the Corps of Engineers contact library, and they have a recording of the kind of presentations that Brian and I and Kenny Thomas did across the nation.
I'm going to see if I could pull it into the chat for us. Went past it, didn't I? Yeah, the recording is right there, and I'm going to copy the link and I'll just drop it in the chat.
And you'll want to put it in the Q&A, Brian. You have access to the chat, but the audience doesn't. So if you put it in the Q&A, then everyone will be able to see that.
Okay.
And please go ahead. Please don't hesitate to call me or email me or text me or whatever, because we really want your feedback on this. The only way we're going to meet our water quality and our flood resilience goals is on a watershed scale of getting more people to improve their soil health.
So I'll put this out there from, the farmer viewpoint. Of course, anytime we see positive things done at a watershed level, for our water quality and flood mitigation, that benefits our community and our state. And, implementing more of these practices on your individual farm, of course, we've seen increases in resiliency and profitability. I'm not all about chasing incentives, but is that a piece of working towards that? Or Scott, you can speak on some of the maybe watershed piece and the availability to help get some of these practices, on the ground from watershed. And I know we have conservation districts and watersheds, and we have lots of different opportunities for some cost share, but are you able to provide any information specifically speaking on the watershed piece?
Well, I would just say that our RAPS groups around the state are always willing to do those kind of cost shares. There's cost share practices through Conservation District. The Kansas Association of Conservation Districts has funding from us through EPA 319 that goes to the particular county conservation districts that have 9-element, these watershed plans, but we're no longer sponsoring those as an organization. So we've given the funds to the KACD, and then if they work in the priority areas that were submitted and approved in the their watershed plan, then that is something the KACD is very interested in providing that cost share. I also will add that we've presented this kind of information to the Watershed District, the State Association of Kansas Watersheds. They look at this as maybe a potential to reduce the size of their impoundments. Their impoundments are expensive to build, they're expensive to maintain, and honestly, we're going to get probably to a point where we have 5 months of rain and 4 months of not rain. And so we're really trying to get the water to go in the ground to make it as a structure, the soil as a structure, and not necessarily not necessarily do away with dams, but we certainly can improve the ecosystem benefits by improving the soil health. And so they're aware of that. Contact your watershed district that you know of and see if there's interest in that. As I said, it's going to take a mass balance of folks in a given catchment area before we can see those kind of results. And I will say, finally, that with the Upper Soldier Creek project we're doing right now, we are using soil health improvement to look at the ability for it to restore the stream flow in a metered manner, so we don't have these high peak flows, and also the ability for it to improve water quality from the standpoint of really bringing that nitrogen to the plant and keeping the nitrogen at the plant level instead of letting it leach, reducing the runoff, and really making that soil health a part of the whole entire watershed.
I like what you said earlier. You said the soil does offer a structure, and I think in the partnering between everybody, including the watershed joint districts, that we should be remembering and maybe keeping a key message in here that agriculture is infrastructure. And this was an interesting discussion that came up when the state was looking at the FEMA brick mitigation grants. And all we have to do is tie it to, I can't remember what subcategory that agricultural came under, but the message I think back to them is needs to be that agriculture is infrastructure. And if we can look at these wide areas of land in that way, I think we're going to change we can be able to change the state of resilience in the state.
Thank you for your presentation today. So I'm sure Scott's been out to my farm too before to look at this. So like a lot of the places you guys talk at, we're 15 to 20 years into the soil health journey, right? So you look at those and you kind of get a benchmark and you say, okay, we can put these in the model. But what happens when you got a guy that's only 2 to 4 years into a journey and he hits a brick wall and he's not going to want to go any further, especially if cost share runs out or anything like that? I think practices will only go as far as guys are willing to spend the money, because it's the mindset of these farmers that will not change. And you hate to keep, funding them if they're just not getting through there, because it's more of a systems approach. You have to, you will start reducing the nitrogen when you know your soil will take that and it's not affecting your yield dramatically. But until it's not, you're seeing a yield reduction still, you're going to still rely on high synthetics to try to keep that yield up there, because you got to be profitable. So I was kind of wondering how that model will put together. You take very few guys that are at the level that a lot of your 20-year and places you guys have research from, and then what happens when you spread that out over what it takes from 0 to 20 years, to show if there is enough of a load reduction through that model.
Well, that was, Bryce, thanks for the question. That was one of the key things that we were literally asking farmers. I was getting a list of farmers who are just getting into their soil health journey, some that have been there for 5 or 6 years, some that have been there for 20 years. And we were trying to get that to look at the organic matter, organic carbon, infiltration rate, aggregate stability, bulk density, all these kind of things that do with the hydrologic function of soil. And the exciting thing is the Soil Health Institute is finally starting to look at the hydrologic function of soil. They did this huge nutrient study around the country with 1,500 farms, but I've talked to several of their soil scientists down there, and they're really looking at how do we show the soil hydrologic function, so we can pay people for their improved soil hydrologic function. The only way we can do that is to get enough data to show what needs to be done. Now, my personal opinion is, if there's some way that we can come up with a way to pay more cost shares of 90%, those kind of things, if there's more cash incentive or whatever it takes. Watershed districts have their own taxing authority, and it really goes back to, we really need to figure out that it's not a hop, skip, and jump approach. You have to have something that's very concentrated, and your concentration is through soil health practitioner community that can coach each other and mentor each other, and help each other through the tough times, and then all those kind of things. And honestly, the whole FEMA brick thing was trying to get FEMA aware of making this and building resilience infrastructure in communities, was what BRIC stood for. And it leveled the playing field, because in mitigation work, you actually have to have a benefit cost analysis. So small towns that only have 400 people are not going to be competing with Hutchinson, Wichita, and so forth. Well, this way, we were hoping to be able to give that funds, because FEMA will not pay for, would not and will not pay for funds to go at the producer level or the landowner level. It has to go at where the mitigation is needed, where the action is needed from the damage of the flooding. And so we were hoping to be able to get funds to a community, and they would be able to distribute that out into their producers. And there would be a lot of, talk back and forth and give and take and so forth, but it'd be the first step of trying to resolve this, because we're never going to get anywhere with our flooding and our water quality if we keep trying to do the same thing and have the same runoff and have the same volume. And we're going to get more and more of that, as the climate and the extreme events happen. That's just going to be something that goes down the road. So we're hoping that with these kind of presentations, people will start thinking along those lines. And water quality is what 319 and KDHE is all about. But let's face it, a lot of people are much more concerned about flooding they're small communities than they are water quality. And so that's the realistic thing that we have to, you know, we're not in a trout stream state like Minnesota. So we really have to look at what are the other opportunities for us, use all these tools and integrate those into a full agricultural landscape plan. Because look, the largest use of land in Kansas is agriculture. The largest tool we have is improved soil health. So that's where that's why we're going through this process.
And correct me if
it-
I'm wrong. So that would lead to where I've always been for years. I think we, on the vast acres of land, can make a higher change than at one river source point, you know, that was targeted in most of these watersheds previously. You know, just a lot of these drove me
Absolutely.
crazy. A lot of these drove me crazy that, you know, they had funding and they couldn't find anybody that was wanting to move a water source or, you know, move cattle out of the stream or do whatever they wanted to. And so the money just sat there, but then they would not pay for cover crops or anything else on the other because that did not show enough of a load reduction. But,
Right.
you know, I think we can see that in that, like you said, if we can show the infiltration and everything like that, you know, the upland is probably just as important as the in stream at times.
Exactly. And I will say this, Bryce, remember a water quality monitoring point, those 9-element watershed plans are based on water quality problems, not flooding problems. We had some plans that included flooding, but water quality is the main goal. Those waters are impaired and we're trying to get them off got them off the impaired list. And so that's the reason why, you know, moving waters. Well, if you've got a fecal coliform or E. coli bacteria list impairment in that water body, you're going to have to really work very, very diligently at the source level. Not to say that improved soil health isn't going to help, because you can actually take your cows and graze them on the cover crops instead of having, you know, extend their forage season and all those kind of things. So as you said, I really appreciate your comment about system. It's all got to be a system approach, and that's really what we've lost. That's the reason why our hydrology is so out of balance right now. You want to reduce your stream bank problems on unreservoir managed streams and those kind of things. You got to get the water to go in the soil, under the soil, into the geologic formation and into the base flow. You will really reduce the amount of stream bank impact if you can do that on a continual basis.
You know, with
go ahead.
Rossville, just real quick, I was going to say with the city of Rossville, we'd done, honestly, study after study for mitigating their flood risk and them trying to slice and dice different alternatives to help them be flood resilient. But they're at near the mouth of the Kansas River and Cross Creek. But the last thing that we told the city council there was the watershed joint district has potential to offer them more solutions than they could get, because we could never find a benefit cost ratio that was good for a levee or a diversion. And there were other problems, can't divert water down to Silver Lake, things like that. So the watershed, the hinterlands of that watershed hold the solution for them. And so that was the last action item that we give them. That's what these hazard mitigation plans do, is they give them an action. You got the risks and then you got the actions, and they're all hazard, but you know, in that case, it's flooding. And we were like, we actually think that your action is going to be working with your joint watershed district for Cross Creek, but these aren't in every watershed in Kansas. They're only 22% of the land in the state. So.
Yeah, I mean, me out here in Western Kansas, I'm optimistic that if, you know, all of us could go from a 1/2 inch infiltration rate per hour to 5 inches with some, you know, 5 to 8 years worth of management practices, I would like to know then with the limas and everything in here, can we slow the depletion of our aquifer out here? You know, that's my ultimate goal is, you know, guys be more efficient with their water, because most pivots are horrible infiltrating most of the time. And, but I mean, even the dry land can do it. I mean, I think a good soil health field can probably infiltrate just as well and recharge better than what some of the playas I have out here, you know, are doing. But
Yeah,
that could be a whole different model and study to do again on that. But, you know, it's like I said, if we can move that needle just a little bit, how dramatic could that affect, you know, can we, you know, get that water back down to where eventually we could slowly maintain that aquifer drop and not near as bad as what it is today currently?
correct. And I will say this, we have convinced EPA Region 7 that soil health improvement is the most crucial way to approach water quality issues in an agricultural state, period. I just talked to some people at a workshop, and I actually sent this invitation to some EPA people in at headquarters. And of course, you know, they're kind of in and out, but she said as soon as she can, she's going to look at this, and she's going to be able to try to get the region around here to really start looking at this. All 4 states, they're all working on soil health improvement, but I don't think they've had the kind of the framework and the thought process that we've been doing in Kansas. And so I'm hoping, and she's on the ag, what they call the National Ag Committee, that all these different agencies work, you know, meet at the table. I'm really hoping we can figure out how to pay people for improving their hydrologic function. We're going to work
Scott,
with this. We're talking to
Scott,
the Soil Health Institute about that too.
hey, Scott mentioned we went out, Scott and I went out to EPA Region 10, and they invited us to come out there as to a dialogue. It was a small group discussion of about 40 people. And anyways, there was some proceedings from that got published.
Yeah,
on all this.
we can make that available to Joanna if she wants to do something with that.
Yes,
Yeah,
please. And she's been making notes of anything that's been dropped in the Q&A and chat, and we'll have that available on some of the follow-up here. I appreciate hearing. It's always nice to hear when so many are working really towards the same end goals, but from different pieces, because it will take a lot to move to keep moving that needle forward and doing things. We are past 1 o'clock, not by much, but I did want to go ahead and probably wrap up today. And I want to thank Brian for being on. Thank you, Scott, for providing your perspective and input as well. I wanted to let everyone know this was our last forum for 2025, as the last Thursday of the next 2 months will be holidays. So we will be taking that day off. As I had already mentioned at the beginning, if you go to the Q&A in the open questions, we did drop the link for the 2026 forms that you can get registered. We'll be sharing that through our social media and newsletter as well to give some more access to it. And just a clarification, I believe I've been saying things incorrectly. These are the last Thursday of each month. So our next one will be on January 29th, 2026. Or our next one to kick off 2026. Joanna and I are actively working on that lineup for the next year. If you have thoughts, comments, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. You can access us through the website. There's a place where you can reach us, or you can just go to Jennifer@kssoilhealth.org. We'd be appreciative to get your thoughts and inputs. With that, Joanna, do you have anything else to close out with? We don't have a speaker for our next time to introduce yet.
I do not. Nope, just join us in January. So
I would be willing to, if somebody wanted to hear more about this, the Kansas Healthy Watersheds and how that came about and everything, I'm certainly willing to do that.
That sounds great. Scott, we'll go ahead and include your email address and any future in the correspondence we send out following this session, if that works.
That'll be great.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Good luck with the remainder of 2025, and we look forward to seeing you in January.
See y'all later.
All right.